Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to our New Year Neurodiversity webinar. Just want to give it a minute or two so that other people join. So please do make yourselves comfortable. Introduce yourselves in the chat if you're and where you are. Okay, the numbers seem to have slowed down, so I'll get started now. So nice to see a few people introducing themselves in the chat. Hi, Grace. Hi, Fiona. So hello, everyone. My name's Harry. I'm a managing consultant psychologist here at CiC, working in the global specialist services team. So very happy to be with you all today in the new year to talking about workplace preferences, talking about what we find helpful at work in order to create our best selves, help us be more productive, help just get the best out of ourselves. A bit of background about me for anyone who I'm new to. So I've worked in workplace psychology for around 10 years, and in neurodiversity for about 10 years as well, starting off working in schools, in various levels of education, whether it be primary, secondary, university, also supporting people in a one-to-one coaching capacity, whether it be at work, but also helping organizations become more neuro-inclusive. Bit of background as well on neurodiversity. Some of you, it might be a new term, so I'll just do a little bit of background here, just so you've got understanding about what that term means, where it's come from, and what we're talking about today. So neurodiversity is a term that refers to natural variations in human brain function and embraces that people have different ways of thinking, learning, and processing information. So it highlights that people naturally think about things differently. So I really like this picture as a way of describing that. It's not just a normal and a different, it's more just there's a spectrum of differences. And I think this picture of different brains thinking in different ways really helps demonstrate that. Some people are more maybe problem solvers or better with puzzles. Some people are more visual. Some people think more in tangents. Some people are better with numbers. Some people more analytical. Some people more process driven. And it's all those different thought processes. We put them all together. Helps us with having more innovation within our teams as well. Come up with new creative solutions. As a key idea from neurodiversity is we are all unique. We all sit within that complex spectrum, different strengths and different challenges. Within that, it's also used as an umbrella term, some common learning differences and diagnosis that you may have heard of. So I've put together this little umbrella with some of the common diagnoses there that I've seen and heard of. So this isn't an exhaustive list. This is always evolving. This is just some of the most common diagnoses that I've heard of. As you can see here, we spoke about in the previous webinar in December, if anyone attended, dyslexia. So those differences of processing written information, maybe, and reading as well. For dyspraxia here, dyscalculia, ADHD, as we spoke about in the previous webinar, looking at how that impacts on maybe focusing attention, sustained attention, or regulating attention, that impulsivity, hyperactivity. Tourette's, something that's more recently been added to this kind of neurodiversity spectrum. And lastly, autism as well, we spoke about in the last webinar in December, looking at how that impacts on how people communicate in different ways, the differences in communication, understanding of non-verbal cues, how people manage or deal with change, but also the sensory sensitivities, which is something we'll definitely speak about today as well in terms of when we talk about those workplace preferences. What some people might find really helpful to help them focus might be different to someone else. It's important to bear in mind. Key message I always say with this umbrella term and the different diagnosis is that two people with the same diagnosis may present with different challenges and strengths. There is a list of maybe symptoms or characteristics people present within a diagnosis. There'll be a threshold they meet in order to get that diagnosis. It doesn't mean that it presents exactly the same for each individual. There might be a different collection of those characteristics one person has compared to someone else. May also depend on the environment someone's in, the role someone's doing, how those strengths or the challenges present may be very different. One person might be in a role that doesn't those difficulties don't come up. They're playing to their strengths. But then a subtle change in their environment, maybe a change in manager or a change in what they've been asked to do on a daily basis, that can then change how that looks for them. Someone also may have multiple diagnoses, also important to bear in mind. So people don't perfectly fit into one of these categories. So I often see people with multiple diagnoses or maybe traits of another one within their diagnosis. So, for example, someone might be dyslexic and be dyspraxic as well. Some might have ADHD and autism. Have dyslexia and autism, or dyslexia and ADHD. So you think about those combinations, different characteristics, and how that might then present for that individual is very unique to them. So a key message, something will come back to you later as well. If you're thinking about any managers here or colleagues who are working with someone who's neurodivergent, how you then address that conversation is making sure you're doing it from a very kind of unique perspective. Talking about what they need, and not when you hear a diagnosis, not assuming you know everything that they need or what they're going through. I think something I've heard of before being quite dangerous when someone's come to them, maybe someone who's dyslexic, and asked them, oh, they need some adjustments in the workplace. And managers thought they know everything about it and told them what they need as opposed to listening to them. So always important to keep an open mind. So something I'd really reiterate throughout today as well. Just go to the chat to see if there's any questions or thoughts on this. There's a lot of people introduce themselves. Like, it seems a very wide range of people today. So people from all over the world, which is great to see. People sharing their family members diagnosed with autism, or themselves also diagnosed with autism. You can see that it's not always diagnosed in childhood. This is something you can be diagnosed with at different stages. You can see that that's growing more. People getting diagnosed in their 30s, 40s, 50s because of that growing awareness now compared to what there was in the past as well. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's definitely not alone there. Someone just shared at 60, so I doubt anyone will be interested in giving me a diagnosis. No, I think I've definitely seen people getting diagnosis later in their lives. So please do look into it. If it's something you feel like it would benefit you, definitely worth doing. So a quick look at the session outline. Reflecting on what you need, first of all. So today I'd really like to make this session about it's a new year, without sounding too cliche, thinking about, those reflections, what those resolutions are, taking that as part of the discussion. So we're going to be really thinking about what's worked well for you last year, what's helped you be more productive. You don't have to be neurodivergent to have that thought. You can think about yourself. We all do that. Think about what's gone well, what we can do differently. Thinking about the challenges we've had and what we can do differently. If there are people here who are neurodivergent and want to share, when we come to those slides and think about for them, what they found challenging and what they'd like to ask for, that'd be great if you want to share that in the chat. Great. Share any top tips you have, any experiences, because it helps other people feel safe to do the same, and it might resonate with them. Stuff that you're going through might really link with them as well. Next, we'll go on to the challenges and having those adjustment conversations. It'd be good to hear kind of anyone here has had any particular challenges with having those, what they've experienced as a barrier, and having that conversation in their organisation or with their manager. And then just some tips on kind of how to have those proactive kind of neurodiversity adjustment conversations, what things you can do differently. I've written that out based on my experiences with some of the barriers I've seen. To managers engaging with that, or kind of the challenges they've had with engaging with some of their team as well. So I've just seen a message in the chat. I'll come into the chat now while we're going through this. So someone just mentioned here, it must be difficult for companies to support people in broad roles with dyscalculia. Yeah, so I think it can depend on, definitely there's some challenge of dyscalculia, but it depends on the role people are in. So broad roles, absolutely, I can imagine be quite challenging. I guess it depends on how they can tailor their role to their strengths as well, maybe. Um, yeah, if it was just asked if anyone's got any tips, I'd be grateful. So yeah, please do share if anyone's got any tips if they've experienced something like that. So first, New Year reflection, thinking about what's helped you be more productive at work this past year. If anyone wants to share in the chat what they found helpful. Has it been being able to go to the office? Has it been being able to work from home? Is it the work environment itself? I know for myself, I work very well at home. Sometimes a couple of times a week or once a week, it's nice to go in and just get some work done and in a different environment. So I find that environment helpful. Yeah, some people mixed emotions there. I think some people do love the office, some people love working from home. That balance is definitely useful for me. Hybrid working. Jonathan shared a good one here. So identify one or two key daily objectives and focus on them. Yeah, so really kind of helping zero in on what priorities are, put that focus in on what you're doing. That's really helpful. That's something I talk about actually with some of my coaching clients who have who are diagnosed with ADHD, thinking about how we create those priorities, those deadlines, and those that sort of artificial kind of pressure sometimes as well. It's quite helpful. So that's a really good one. It really help people with organisation as well, to get into the habit of that planning. That's a really good one. Fiona shared, going into the office made things so much better for me. Working from home far too long makes me go downhill. Yeah, so I think we miss out on, I guess, having that mental separation can sometimes be helpful as well. And I guess, having other people you're working with helps give you a little bit of a boost. But it's not for everyone. Again, some people can find the office environment very distracting. They might find, I think from a sensory side, think about the distractions being in the office. Some people can find it hard to focus in that environment. They might find it easy to focus at home. So it can go both ways. Chris has shared here, I've been using white noise apps, which is great for hyperfocus. That's a good one. Yeah, thinking about how you sort of tap into that hyperfocus. So for those who um, might have heard of that before, maybe not. That's something we often see with ADHD as well, is it's not just a lack of focus at all times. There are periods of hyperfocus you can tap into. So finding ways of doing that is really helpful. So using that kind of white noise app can help block out distractions as well. People find that really helpful, but actually zero in on what you're doing. Adam shared preferred working from home. But yeah, having the office could change of scenery. So Sherry shared here using a particular app to Asana. So all my tasks go in there, home or work. I find working from home a few times a week really helps wind down from the busy office. Yeah, so having that kind of time to recharge is really helpful. Yeah, here's a good one here from Melanie, thinking about managing distractions. We always got these pinging emails coming up all the time and Teams messages. So how do we help ourselves zero in on what we're doing? So turning off my emails, really struggle with the office due to noise. So yeah, turning off emails first of all helps kind of you focus in what you're doing. But then notice as well with the office that it's really hard to focus on because of the noise. But it's just certain times of day, so then you can learn, maybe I can be here for certain points, or I can move to a different part of the office, or just come at a certain time. Yeah, so Leslie shared here, on returning to work more frequently in the office, I found sensitive to the office noise, more sensitive to the office noise. So finding that, liking that the fine split, struggling with that might be a bit of something to work on. But there's a few options there people have spoken about there already. You could always take away thinking about using kind of ear defenders, or using white noise can be really helpful for that. We'll talk about later as well. As Peter shared, seeking neurodiverse colleagues definitely helps with the sense of isolation that can sometimes come from experiencing workplace demands differently. Going to the office is a massive tonic with this in mind. Yeah, so kind of talking with other people you may be experiencing different challenges or similar challenges, I think is really helpful. And also helps that sense of isolation. Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really good point. Anything else anyone's found helpful, even with maybe digesting emails or how they've managed their time, or please do share. People using to-do lists, so Joanne's shared here, ticking things off a to-do list. Helps you feel that sense of achievement as well. You can see that it kind of reflecting as you go through the day, aren't you? Kind of how productive you're being. So that's a really good one. Line manager gives me freedom to set up my own timelines and work quite autonomously. Yeah, so autonomy is such a massive, it's something I spoke about in a previous webinar, thinking about happiness in the workplace and or just our well-being in the workplace, and how autonomy is such a massive, is one of the factors that really impacts our well-being at work. So yeah, having that line manager do that is really beneficial. So if any line managers here, it's something you can easily do, just trying to give that autonomy to people's workday can make a massive difference to give them the ability to be flexible with their own time and create their own strategies that work for them. Regularly reassessing priorities. So now just had my adjustable loops are great. They have 3 settings. I'm assuming that they please do put in the chat if I'm wrong. I'm assuming they're the hearing loops that help with hearing different parts of the office. I think the acoustics of some parts of the office can be quite difficult. So please do correct me if I'm wrong. Kirsten's shared here, if I need to put myself into hyperfocus ADHD here, I tell my team that I'm out of contact, but my status says do not disturb. Yeah, so having the flexibility to do that. Sometimes people in the office have like a little signal or something they put on their desk that tells them they're not to be approached as well at certain times. So I think that's a really good one. Yes, you're doing that on your computer as well. Kind of having those, not being allowed to have those do not disturb types, so you can really focus in what you're doing. That's really good. So Alexandra's asked here, I've welcome tips for ADHD. I realised that I managed pretty well in academia because it was so flexible. So yes, having that flexibility. Yeah, so I think similar to the challenges I see with people coming out of school, actually just not university necessarily, but sorry, more in university, but compared to primary schools or secondary schools, when they've left those rigid environment to come to university, there's more flexibility. They really enjoy that more. But then the workplace can be quite not consistent with that, can't it? Sometimes there's flexibility and sometimes there's not. Someone uses concentration music on YouTube to help with focus in the office. The Calm app helping with focus. Brown and pink noises. Yeah, I've not looked into those. There's lots of different things you can find on YouTube. Just conscious of time, I'll move on. But thanks everyone for sharing kind of what you found helpful. I think there's probably a few things that other people might have heard and helps them. They might try that in the coming weeks as well. Next question, I guess, thinking about what the barriers are. So what you found helpful, but what was a barrier to your productivity? Is there anything you found particularly difficult? Someone shared a really good one here, actually, before we carry on. So having meeting notes pre-meeting so I can look over them. Absolutely. So helps you be more present in the meeting as well, doesn't it? If you know what's coming up. So yeah, that's something we'll come up to with the adjustments later as well. I found out listening to the Wicked soundtrack when in the office helps me. I always struggle with any music that has words in it. I find myself start writing down the words as opposed to what I'm supposed to be focusing on. So it's got to be something instrumental for me if I'm doing that. Meetings longer than 30 minutes. Yeah, so if meetings take a bit longer, they should, are quite long. That can be quite draining for some people. If you think about from a neurodiversity perspective as well, people who struggle with processing verbal information, so that kind of a long period of trying to focus and process that verbal information. Also the focus time, maybe from an ADHD perspective. Maybe if they struggle with being in social settings from an autism perspective, maybe the social anxiety of that can be quite overwhelming as well. So as longer meetings can sometimes lead to a lot of exhaustion. People come out of that and feel like they need a long break after that as well. Office being noisy. Yeah, it's definitely a big one. So how do you find that space for you to focus? Especially, I know in the past, I think it's less of a problem now, but people used to have, I know I used to do, doing a lot more one-to-one coaching. You see a lot of offices where there was no headphone policies. I think that's hopefully more of something of the past, but people don't realize that it's actually something that's going to help them. People are using it as a way of trying to help focus in on what they're doing, as opposed to it being seen as just slacking off. So that can be a good thing to try and utilize. Lack of clarity, clear direction from seniors and tasks. Yeah, absolutely. I think definitely from I definitely with people I've worked with ADHD, I think having that lack of clear direction and then impacts on focus as well, can find yourself flittering between things, no clear priority, no clear deadlines, find yourself, it's quite hard to kind of tap into that focus. Um, so barriers for me, everything seeming urgent. It's not having that clarity. Again, it's probably quite similar. Not having that clarity of what is a priority. So it's impacting on prioritizing. Meetings where I don't need to actively contribute. So yeah, I guess that could be quite frustrating if you feel like I guess you could be doing something else. Yes, absolutely, I can get that. Um, yeah, there's distractions from emails, instant messages. So you already Melly's point here. I guess we could think about those. Someone mentioned earlier using the do not disturb sign or turning off emails. That could be a good one to help by blocking those out. Having multiple deadlines or coming up at once. Yes, how we manage that, I guess, um, really tricky. Yeah, especially if we haven't got that clear direction earlier on. Working in open plan office, yeah, it's kind of the distractions from the office, and noise from the office. A few of you have mentioned the noise from the office. You hear a lot of people with autism experiencing those sensory sensitivities. So that's where people experience the heightened kind of sensory sensitivities. Yeah. So if you think about in an office environment, the lighting, flicker rates of lights, noises from air conditioning, temperature of the room, noises, the acoustics of the room, all these things can be more overwhelming for certain people as well. So thinking about how we build our spaces or what we allow people to use in those spaces, for example, like using ear defenders can be really helpful. It's shared here. So Marilyn is shared here. So my teenage son has ADHD and he uses his headphones to listen to music all the time when he's not at school. So the music on constantly keeps him from getting bored. I'm concerned that his brain is constantly being stimulated with no quiet time during wake hours. Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I can see that being a concern as well. Sometimes you need that switch off time, don't you, to help um, disengage and helps kind of you recharge a little bit as well. But I've heard that before. People listen to music more frequently. I think sometimes when they have that quiet time, they struggle to find their mind kind of ruminating on things or worrying about other things. So finding different strategies, maybe kind of to sidestep away from the music to something else, maybe something to work on there. I'll look at any others here. Vague directions. Yeah. So again, how directions are given as well, not just I think I mentioned before, the clarity. So also vague directions for tasks. How clear we are with directions is something that helps everyone, but I think definitely from an autism perspective, some people might struggle with unclear language, or they might take things literally, struggle with things spoken between the lines. So if you're not very clear and to the point with what you're asking someone to do, they may not do that. So I think it's perhaps regardless of autism, for all us, it's something that's very useful just to be very clear with our instructions. It helps people be more focused on what they need to do. Lack of flexibility, again, come back to autonomy. Let's have a look at the others. Resources is my issue, leading to multiple parallel tasks. Being a team of one, priorities can be an issue. Yeah, so kind of find yourself a lot of things going on at once at the same time. Find yourself jumping between things might be a challenge there. Being micromanaged, yeah, so the opposite of that kind of autonomy. That's definitely something that I think none of us enjoy. Meetings that aren't well led, extroverts dominating conversations. This is a really good point as well. So thinking about meeting settings, I'm sure we've all experienced that, where there's some people who are much more dominant in meetings, which is, is great if they're able to hold conversations in that way and be more open and extroverted. But there's some people there who maybe want to contribute, who maybe struggle to get their point across. So you see some people now putting in, maybe using interactive whiteboards on Teams to try and, people using the hand raise system to help make sure everyone gets their point across. So that's definitely a really good point there from Emma. So thanks for sharing that. Demands come from different directions, struggling to remember everything. Actually, move on to the next slide as well, because this helps what we're thinking about. There's some of the areas I'd consider from a neurodiversity perspective. So let's give you some ideas if you haven't thought of any already. Yeah, so remembering everything that's coming in, so that kind of working memory being tested. So thinking about if you're given a task to do, you come back to what you're doing, maybe forget what you've been told to do, or so maybe having that opportunity to write things down, or information being given to you in a certain way. I know that's something I've worked on with people. Is it given to them in writing? Is it given to them in a shared kind of calendar? They can come back to it and have that reminder. That's a really good one. So thank you for sharing that, Leslie. That's something that I think a lot of people hear. It resonates, I can see already with a lot of people. So Melanie said here, I can hear the lighting, as we spoke about the sensory sensitivities, sensory environment. There's stuff like that that some people, they don't even realize is a noise or a distraction. Some people can be really overwhelming. So you think about the stress that can cause people coming into the office as well, just the noise from the lighting itself. Little things like that. Things that if you look around your room now, if you are in the office, there's so many sensory inputs that if you haven't even considered could be a distraction. So if someone is seeming kind of out of focus or struggling in the office, so it's always worth bearing that in mind. Kind of, could this be an issue as well? I'll keep going, just conscious of time. We could be here all day talking about these, but thank you everyone for keep sharing your thoughts, keep talking to each other in the chat. I think it's really great to kind of see if everyone having kind of similar, some similar challenges and kind of what they've used to help with it. Lastly, before we move on to the second half, how would you like to work differently this year? So thinking about those challenges, what would you need differently, and what would you need to ask for this? So yeah, thinking about those challenges, and even who would you approach for that as well? I suppose who would be the person you could talk to for that? So how would you like to work differently this year? What do you need for this? So maybe would you if you find the office distracting, would you like to move to a different part of the office maybe? Would you prefer working from home? Is there something you could ask for? Some people mentioned using kind of white noise or listening to music or using ear defenders in the office. Is that something you can utilize? How tasks are broken down. A few of you mentioned having unclear instructions. Is that something that you can bring to management or your team? How that's given, how that information is given. So Rebecca shared here, I asked for a follow-up email or we've forgotten. Yeah, that's a really good one. Yeah, I think that's definitely a good one. I always find that helpful. I think just to have the key actions written up. I always try and do that whenever I've had a meeting. I'd like to be able to make full use of all available and suitable workplace adjustment options, but presently don't know what they are. Yeah, that's a really good point. So just kind of think about the barriers to that, as will come about in one of my next questions. A lot of the time we don't know what's available, and actually a lot of the time a lot of people who are involved in the adjustments don't know what's available as well. So that can be a massive barrier. So shared here. So having an OT assessment helps to get the greater flexibility to work from home. That's great. So it gives you that. And at the end of the day, we all need to work in different ways. We're all different people. We're all unique in kind of how we work and what we find helpful. So working from home for one person might help them be more productive. For one person, they might prefer being in the office. So it's very much having that flexibility is really helpful. I always think I need a new planner or notebook. This is from Melanie. Spent a fortune last year. Yeah, some people might prefer having a planner to write down in. I know when I've done coaching with people in their organisation, trying to think about what's best for you. Some people like using Outlook. Some people like using different Microsoft apps. I forgot what the other one's called. There's a few different ones people use for organisation. Other apps people have mentioned in this chat already. There's lots of different apps people can find helpful, or people prefer just writing it down on a physical piece of paper. Yeah, you're not alone there. I think a lot of people find that helpful. So I think that's an easy, cheap adjustment for an organisation to put in place as well. So definitely something that if it's going to help you be more productive, always worth asking for. So Jonathan just shared, I need to work in the office. Home working is distracting. Yeah, exactly. So as we said, some people prefer being in the office, some people don't. I think that's having that flexibility is so key. But plus very much prefer written instruction. Verbal directions don't go in so well. Yeah, so kind of following up something so simple like following up meetings with written instructions or steps can just make a massive difference to the productivity and the direction and the clarity and kind of accuracy of what's being delivered. So I think that's a really good one. I'm sure there's lots of people here who share that thought. I'm sharing one a bit in the office one day less kind of having that time to recover from the sensory issues, tiredness. Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, you find yourself using a weekend to recover can be quite overwhelming, can't it? Absolutely. Yeah, as Adam mentioned here, making extremely tired by Friday. Yeah, so from an organizational perspective, if you're thinking about how do we get the best out of everyone, giving you that extra day just helps you be more productive, helps you feel better within yourself as well. So I think it's a win-win. Um, using Copilot, as you mentioned here, so summarizing longer documents. Yeah, something I know some of my previous colleagues, or people I've worked with who are dyslexic, struggle with processing lots of information in written text or getting their ideas down on paper. Just playing around with different AI systems as well to try and help them be more productive. Some people might use assistive technology here. I think they're the more commonly used ones. I think AI is probably more the newer technology people are using now, but assistive technology like Dragon or Read and Write, things like that, people use to help get their ideas down on paper or taking in information. So lots of little things there that can be helpful. I tell the team to watch out for things I've written as speed in case I've dropped words. Yeah, that's helpful. Just asking them just to proofread. I think it's useful as well. And I think you asking that as well, I think helps other people feel safe to do the same if they're having a similar problem. Let's have a look. Who's put here less exhausted as I think masking exhausting. Absolutely, a massive point here. It comes back to something we spoke about briefly in the December webinar, thinking about psychological safety. People often mask the differences because they're worried about how they come across or appearing different, and they want to fit in with what the norm is, what expectation is. So appearing like they can cope, appearing like everything's fine, and then they come home and feel exhausted and sort of knocked out from the day of work. So how do we create an environment where people can bring their authentic self to work, ask for what they need, and they leave work feeling less exhausted, come back the next day being more productive? So that's a really, really, really good point. Thanks, Louise. I'll keep going. Just keep conscious of time. Thank you everyone for sharing. There's a lot of good points here. Sorry if I've missed yours. Just keep sharing. I'll keep moving along. So yeah, these are kind of the areas that I often think about. So reading, think about assistive technology, AI. People mentioned there is a really good one. Maybe the color of documents as well. So I spoke about with the previous webinar, thinking about visual stress. People reading off contrasting colors, they might find really challenging because you might change the color of some documents. Thinking about accessibility of documentation. Verbal communication, thinking about the language used, we spoke about repeating information, recording, following up and writing. Sequencing, I know I've worked with a few people with dyspraxia on this, thinking about step-by-step guides, helping them kind of get a new process into with demonstrations or kind of practice, getting new processes into action. Sensory sensitivities, some of you mentioned working from home, or I've mentioned positioning in the office, noise cancelling headphones. Focus distractions, using those organization tools can help with that as well. Using breaks as well, I think is really useful. You might need to take more regular breaks, or you might have heard of the Pomodoro method, is really good. So that's 25 minutes and then 5 minutes, 5 minutes off for a break, so kind of shorter bursts, especially in those days where you're really struggling. Organization, breaking tasks down, there's clear deadlines, priorities. I think a few of you mentioned in the chat, that's really helpful. And well-being, I think, just thinking about the knock-on effect to our well-being. Something we'll talk about in a future webinar this year, think about neurodiversity and well-being, the kind of links between the two. EAP resources, I think it's always worth linking in with, thinking about that work-life balance, the impact on our fatigue, our energy levels, how that links in with burnout as well. So I think from a manager perspective, not just thinking about neurodiversity as separate, thinking about the knock-on effect to our well-being is really key. I see so many suggestions coming in the chat. Yeah, just really, really great. And if someone mentioned there, taken. Yeah, just kind of things that can be used that also not necessarily cost effective. There's lots of accessibility tools now on Microsoft. So if you want to have a look at Microsoft accessibility, look at their neurodiversity page. There's loads of different things you can use to have play around with. Lindsay said here the flat tomato app is really good for the Pomodoro technique. And I often use that to get me focused. Yeah, so if you want to give that a go, worth trying. But yeah, please keep sharing your strategies in the chat because you never know who it might help. I should skip past. So quickly, I'll go on to this before we go into the second half of our presentation. So what barriers are there for you discussing your needs in the workplace? Please do keep sharing your strategies as well. But are there any barriers you find, like what I think we've already spoke about masking, is that feeling safe? Is there anything else that you feel could be a barrier to you discussing your needs in the workplace? Someone also mentioned, I guess, not knowing what's available. That's a massive one as well. Joe's put in there the big word, so the stigma. That's definitely the one I use a lot thinking about neurodiversity. There's a lot of stigma around neurodiversity and how you're perceived. Yeah, so Anna shared the same. The fear and stigma of being neurodiverse, absolutely. People feeling uncomfortable talking about being neurodiverse, not they don't want to appear different or like they need extra support. They're worried about how they'll be perceived afterwards. Yeah, not being perceived to be operating 100%, someone mentioned there. But the difference is, Adam's mentioned here, I feel safe at work. My line manager and colleagues are all very supportive, and that change can just make a massive difference to your perception of your work and how you come to that role as well. So I can see that when people change line managers as well, they go from a really supportive manager to an unsupportive manager, and their entire perception of their role changes. So it shows the value of that as well. Yeah, seen as a lack of performance or ability. Funding is a big one. Yeah, and certain organisations where it can be difficult. I understand that. It can be a big barrier. Yeah, again, people being seen as a failure or weak, not being seen as capable. So managers in the chat here, the rejection sensitivity disorder can put you off discussing. Yeah, so kind of the worry about how you've having those conversations is what that's a really, really good point. Thanks for sharing. Exposing your vulnerability, the fear of stigma, being treated differently. Yes, thank you everyone for sharing that. It's something that's hard to overcome, especially people who had those diagnoses often have had negative experiences, whether in previous workspaces, in previous or in education, teachers, bullying, whether it be in school or at work as well. So I think it could be quite hard to overturn that, can't it? You've got that ingrained in your brain and to watch out for and protect yourself. It could be quite hard to trust in your environment. I've seen that with people switching jobs as well. I've coached people from one job to another, and you see where they're quite easily triggered as well by some behaviour of some of their colleagues as well, if they're not sure what their intentions are. So I shared this in the last webinar. I think it's really useful, the kind of the Neurodiversity and Business report from last year. There's a new one from this year as well, but you can find that online for free if anyone's interested in finding out more. So they found these particular stats around psychological safety. So psychological safety, first of all, is the belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, mistakes. So very much links in with what we're talking about here, that stigma around neurodiversity, people hiding their neurodiversity from their colleagues, their managers. You can see from the stats here, 65% of neurodivergent employees feared discrimination from management, 55% of neurodivergent employees feared discrimination from colleagues. So there's a high percentage of people who don't feel comfortable talking about being neurodivergent, asking for adjustments, and common kind of complaint, common kind of challenge I've heard from managers is they say, well, I can't help people if they don't ask me. To think about how do we encourage people to have those conversations is really key. So a few other potential barriers here. I think a few of you mentioned these, like stigma around diagnosis, awareness, lack of support resources, perception of unfairness is one I've seen as well. So managers saying, or the organisations saying, we can't give that to you because it's not fair on you to have that and other people not to have that. So seeing it more of a equality over equity. So we want to move more towards that idea of we all need to work in our own way. I think that's the mind shift we try and speak to organisations. So quickly in the chat now, good to hear from you. What can you do to encourage and start conversations? So I know that, like I said, I hear from managers saying, well, I can't make them talk to me. I want to help them, but they're not coming to me or asking for adjustments. So what can we do to encourage and start those conversations in the first place as colleagues of people who are neurodivergent? Any ideas? I'll just have a look at the chat comments while I'm going through here. Someone's mentioned Audible. to the idea of kind of taking in information verbally. I think that's a really good one. And good for people who struggle with processing written information. So if you ever try the read aloud function on Word, or if you use read and write, that does that. So you can listen to things out loud. It's also good for a focus point. So if you know you're struggling at the end of the day to focus, or if you struggle with reading and get distracted, you can read and listen at the same time. Kind of helps with staying on what you're supposed to be doing as well. I use it sometimes as well, just for proofreading, because our brains always try to trick us into missing out those words that are slightly spelled wrong. So if you hear it, it's a lot easier. It's a good way of proofreading your work. So have a look at what people have shared here. So I've been open with my colleagues about my autism and ADHD. I pointed them to Neurodiversity on Instagram so they can get a flavour of my experiences. Yeah, so really kind of sharing your experiences, role modelling that. It's really good. People, again, Mahi shared here the same. So sharing your own experience, personal stories, make them relatable. Exactly. Empowering is the right word I was going to say just then. So you're empowering others to feel safe to do the same. So it's a lot of bravery for some individuals as well if they're the first ones to do that in their organisation, to share that information. But you never know. You'd be quite surprised sometimes how many other people maybe then start talking about it who've been masking the whole time. So that's a really good really good point. Raise awareness, Joe's shared here, carrying out information sessions. Yes, absolutely. So keep raising the awareness from the organisation. That's really helpful. Abudi has shared a book here as well. Eddie Middleton's book is Unmasked. That's a really good one. So Chris shared his unreasonable adjustments. It's worth remembering that employers have a duty to provide them. This is a really good point. So I've definitely seen this more with younger generations who are more aware of kind of, if they've gone through getting adjustments during university as well, who will maybe going through graduate schemes are more aware and more aware, confident in asking for adjustments, having those conversations and knowing what they're kind of legally entitled to. Whereas there's less awareness, people in their late 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. So I think more awareness you have of what you're entitled to is really valuable. So you can bring that to the conversation. So yeah, a few ideas I've got here. So educating yourself, a few of you mentioned raising awareness, to grow your own awareness of neurodiversity, understanding different neurotypes and diagnosis, understanding different working styles, potential adjustments. So educating yourself about the potential adjustments out there as well. You don't have to be an expert in that. I know from my experience, the best thing you can do, the most important thing you can do is listen to an individual, and you can take that information away and try and research afterwards what you can do for them. But really listening and being open-minded to kind of helping them is really important. Is probably one of the key things I can tell you today. Leading by example, a few of you have mentioned this, so like role modeling, advocating, or sharing your own experiences. I should have included in here as well. That kind of, yeah, that sharing lived experience is so key. It helps other people feel safe, helps build that psychological safety, normalizing those adjustment conversations. So not waiting for them to come to you, maybe just having kind of normalizing that adjustment conversation for everyone would be really helpful. So people don't feel singled out. If you're having the adjustment conversation with everyone, just a normal part of your management style, people might feel safer to talk about it and share if they need some support. Proactive conversations. It's one of my favorite words in my job, proactive, not reactive. So it's very important to be proactive in starting those conversations. So instead of being one of those managers who are waiting for them to come to you, you can proactively start those conversations with your team. Make it's like your regular language, how can I support you? What can I do differently for you? Is there any adjustments you need? What's going to help you be more productive? Communicating what support is available. So maybe linking back with that, raising your own awareness. If you can build your awareness of what's available, make suggestions, that could be really, really helpful. And also it's okay to not have all the answers. I've heard so many colleagues and managers saying they've, or colleagues of people I've coached and managers of people I've coached who've said they've avoided the conversation because they're not sure what to say or what they can suggest or if they're the right person to help. And that's totally, you don't have to be an expert in this. It's just about knowing, being open to listening and taking on board what they, you can take that away, and you can always talk to those who maybe do know about the adjustments to find out what could be put in place. So let that be a stumbling block for you. Key message, I think this is really important, coming back to what I spoke about with the neurodiversity slides earlier. Everyone has such a unique experience. So even with the same diagnosis, people might appear and their characteristics and strengths and their challenges might be very different depending on them as an individual, and how they are as as individuals in the role they're in as well. So now I know I made that mistake. You go into I've done assessments where maybe going in for a particular diagnosis, it's a dyslexia assessment or workplace needs assessment, you're expected to see certain things, but it might present slightly differently. So it's something we can all be full foul of. It's important to keep that open mind. Don't feel like you have to label the individual, or if you have to diagnose them. You know, it's not your job to do that, and you may be incorrect in how you've used those labels. If they've got a diagnosis, they want to bring that to you, that's great. It's not a requirement or a prerequisite for you to put adjustments in place. I think that's a really key point. Don't feel like you have to diagnose someone in order for them to get adjustments. Just talking about their workplace preferences, their ways of working, and the more you can do that, the more they can feel open to talk to you. Feel like it's just an open conversation they're having. You could have with them, but also someone else in the team. They might also then share with you if they've got a diagnosis. You can then get some more information from them on that and what they find helpful. So for me, this is a safer way of having those conversations. A few different ideas here of conversation starters that could be helpful. You could start by talking about kind of how they're finding their work. Can make observation if they've kind of felt you see they're kind of not coming to you directly. Kind of notice how they're performing in a certain area of work. Is there anything you could do differently? Asking what their preferred way of working is. Asking if there's anything you can do differently to help them with that. I think it's little things like that. They seem quite straightforward, but honestly, they can make a massive difference. These conversation starters. Just finishing up here now, thinking about the adjustment conversations they are themselves. A few little steps here to think about. One key thing as well we mentioned is that's kind of stigma around diagnosis. People feel uncomfortable talking about it. So how we present ourselves, is also really key. So that active listening is really important. So steps here, first of all, just making sure it's in an environment, if you're having that conversation that they're happy with. Is it a confidential space? Would they rather be online or in person? Have you given them sort of an opportunity to review what's going to be discussed beforehand? That could be quite helpful as well. Practice that active listening. So before I show what this is, can anyone give me an example of what active listening is? What does active listening mean to you? Any ideas? It's using your body language to show you're engaging. Absolutely. Kind of, we're trying to show or open up the conversation. So hoping people feel like we're validating them. And then, it's a non-judgmental conversation, listening style. Fiona shared here, repeating back what you've heard for clarification. Absolutely. So listening to understand, not to interrupt. So really kind of repeating back, showing that understanding. They're actively kind of trying to process what they're saying. Being present and mindful, someone else is speaking. That can sometimes be difficult, can't it? I'm sure, because we all have our own. We've got our own things going on in our lives, in our job as well. So sometimes we might be distracted in our work and in the conversation because something else is happening in our own lives. So trying to be as present and mindful as possible in that moment is really, really important. Listening to understand, Tamarin shared there. Repeating the person's comments back. Nodding. So that kind of non-verbal kind of validation is really helpful. How you sit as well, I think. So not sitting there kind of arms crossed and looking kind of disinterested, kind of have an open body language. It's really good. Responding with supportive affirmations, again, that kind of validation. Yeah, really good. Not offering advice. Yeah, so kind of just listening first, you can offer advice later. But kind of if with the next point, so looking at support resources where they can get support. So really kind of listening first before you interrupt or go on to the next steps. Ask questions to clarify a point. Which is a question in the chat here. I'll just come back to. So I'm just trying to look for the points around active listening. Let me just come back to this question. What about weaknesses like acting emotional or speaking up with more directly than others in meetings? Yeah, it's something I've worked with people on in the past. I've been told in the past, and it's been recorded in performance assessments, that I am too rude, direct, and emotional and must change, be more professional. Should I expect managers to accept this weakness going forward, or just accept that I have to change or mask? I think that's a really good question. I know in the work I've done before with people with from a definitely an ADHD perspective, maybe being accused of being maybe reactive or too emotional in their kind of their responses in meetings or in email chains. Kind of work with them and how they kind of compose their ideas, take that extra time. So it's something definitely you can that can be worked on from both sides, I think. So from the individual sides, trying to help kind of compose those thoughts more clearly. But also from a manager perspective, it's something they should understand more, that it shouldn't necessarily come across as rude, just being more direct and kind of understanding the meaning or the intentions behind it. It's also useful. So that awareness on both sides, I think, is definitely useful. It's a very good question. It seems like a few people have resonated with that as well. Yeah, Jonathan's put in there the ADHD, so the kind of the dual diagnosis term for autism and ADHD. Yeah, so it's something I've heard a lot more recently. Conscious of time, I'll go on to the next part. If there's any questions at the end, please do let me know at the end as well. There's a few other ideas here around active listening. So I think you've mentioned a lot of them here already in the chat. Eye contact, especially from a neurodiversity perspective, I think it's important to bear that in mind, is very much to flex that based on the individual. Because some people might find that more uncomfortable. Definitely see that from autism perspective, where they might find it difficult to maintain eye contact, or make them feel more uncomfortable. They might rather be on a Teams call with a camera off as well, the conversation. So it's something that you have to flex for the individual. Last question. We have questions. So thinking about in those conversations, we've already discussed some of these already. It's good to hear your thoughts on this. So how might people process information differently, especially from a neurodiversity perspective? What might be a barrier in those conversations? So even in the conversation themselves, a lot of you have mentioned kind of being in meetings and maybe not processing it or remembering what's being said. So that could be one point. How can we make our meetings more neuro-inclusive? So having those conversations, first of all, is great. But also, how can we make sure they're inclusive for the neurodiversity perspective? I just mentioned one there as well about the eye contact side. So maybe someone might feel more comfortable doing it online or the camera off or over the phone. So it's really about flexing to each individual. So Manira shared his how to deal with camera off issue. A previous senior didn't understand camera off need. Yeah, so it comes down to awareness, doesn't it? So maybe coming back to that, growing awareness within the organisation with the seniors as well, getting that senior level buy-in is probably something to look at there. Yeah, so Adam shared the same, kind of going back to being on a Teams call with your camera off. This really helps on the days where you don't feel 100%. It definitely helped me. Yeah, so some people might find that really helpful. And again, similar to what I mentioned with the no headphone policy earlier, some people would see that as just a lack of engagement or someone's not paying attention. Well, actually, with some people, it's really helpful. Allowing people to go on walks while joining meetings. Yeah, so kind of you could, I guess it seems a bit more less confrontational as well if you're not sitting kind of facing each other on a walk. Maybe you can have the meeting together on a walk, the meeting together on a walk, sort of side by side, kind of like working together as opposed to kind of face to face. May seem a bit less formal as well. I think some people as well could be scared of those meetings because they hear adjustment meeting, and like I said in the past, people could be scarred from their previous experiences. They might have had a previous role where they've been performance managed out of a role. So they hear those adjustment meetings and it kind of triggers alarm bells. So anything you can do to help reduce that stress can be really helpful. Even providing the agenda beforehand, thinking about processing information, giving people information beforehand so they can process what they want to say. in that meeting. I think that's definitely useful. And asking them to take the minutes of the meeting. Yeah, so you can, as a manager or colleague who's done the led the meeting, maybe following up, making sure you followed up for them. Don't give them the requirement to do that. So that written follow up, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of people find it hard to multitask, write notes while listening at the same time. So, and that will impact on their ability to engage in the meeting as well. So if you're taking that responsibility away, it can make a big difference. Create time to talk about preferences and let the whole team decide together to build team understanding and support. That's a really good point as well. It's not just about the adjustments you have with that you agree with your manager, it's about how the team understands that as well. That can also help. I've heard before where teams have had seen adjustments happen, but because they don't understand why it's happening, there's that resentment that grows because they don't understand why that individual is getting extra or getting a different way of working when they're not. So if you have that conversation with your manager, but also how you share that with the team is so important. Because I think most people have that, you know, when they know they're fully on board and they understand and they engage with it. So I think it really helps. It helps build that team morale. I think that's really great. I'll share a few thoughts I had here as well. Accessibility of communication, really, so clear and concise, being clear with the language, what's been agreed. Like we said, some people might struggle with it being if it's not to the point or too abstract in terms of the language. So being very clear and concise with what you've agreed, repeat and check for understanding. So some people might have not fully understood what you said, so be able to repeat or check for understanding in that meeting, similar to the active listening, but just checking in with people as well, making sure they understand what's being discussed. And as we said, recording meetings or following up in writing. People might prefer the following up in writing more. Recording meetings sometimes seems a bit more formalized, so people might be scared of that. So you might prefer the follow up in writing. But again, down to the individual, I think worth asking. It's definitely worth suggesting, and people can choose what's best for them. As always, in our sessions, we have our personal action plan just to try and create some small, smart goals for you all. So what is it you have thought from today you're going to start doing differently, or anything you can continue doing, or anything you're going to stop doing? Please do feel free to share, or have a little time. You've got a few minutes here at the end here just to have a quiet reflection, have a think about what you could do differently, how you're going to change what you're going to do this week or next week. What little actions can you take? If you're willing to share, please do. A booty's already put in here. I've already stopped. I told my team to stop messaging me on Teams if they want to reply. Yeah, so kind of creating those boundaries is a good one. Yeah, not expecting a neurodivergent employee to note take online in the Teams meeting. Yeah, so kind of making sure you're aware of who has that responsibility and how you do that in a meeting. So that's a really good one. Please do feel free to ask any questions as well. I know we're conscious of time, people might need to jump off. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. If not, keep sharing your actions as well. Advocate for what I need, stop saying yes to everything. Yeah, absolutely. Protecting our boundaries, that's something, neurodiversity or not, it's something for all of us to do. We can very easily all fall into burnout if we don't protect our boundaries. So it's useful to know what your capacity is, know when you say no, or when you should say no. So yeah, we've got to protect ourselves first in order to be more productive. Yeah, create a program of events to raise awareness of these issues. Absolutely, just keeping the conversation going. Sherry shared here, you can record and then transcribe meetings in Teams. And Copilot's very good for summarizing actions. Trialing Copilot now. So yeah, trial that. I think there's so many AI solutions. I feel like they're popping up everywhere now. There's so many solutions there that could be so valuable. So worth exploring if you haven't already. I know I haven't. Something I need to do. So Leslie just this in itself has been helpful. Just a reminder that you're not alone in what you're experiencing. Exactly. I think this is always the value of the Teams chat for me. I think just having everyone share their thoughts and you can share that you're not alone. So I think, and hopefully some of you picked up some tips off each other as well. So I think that's always very valuable for me. Conscious of time, so I'll let you all go. If you've got any questions, if you'd rather ask privately, please do feel free to drop us a message. and I'm happy to give some solutions that way as well. Thank you everyone for today. Be having monthly neurodiversity sessions moving forward, so please do look out for our calendar that's being put out there now this week or the following week. So have a lovely afternoon or morning, everyone. Catch up with you soon.